Hello, everybody. This is a disaster because, picture speaks 1,000 words, and we keep losing my picture. But so I'll try 1,000 words. First of all, I should say I'm an imposter. I'm not involved in consciousness studies. I'm a molecular biologist, a cellular biologist, doing bench science for 60 years. So why now consciousness? I was getting very confused. Consciousness is appearing a lot in conferences and talks and being written about, and I was getting very confused. Some people say it's in the body, some people say it's not in the body, it's out there. Some people say I don't have consciousness, but consciousness has me. So I started to think about it, and I thought, well, for me, both of those are true. I definitely have consciousness. I see, I hear, I smell, I think, and etc. I have feelings, emotions. I have consciousness. But there are other times when I'm quite clear that consciousness has me, when I'm not concerned about survival of this physical being and its ego, and I'm out there admiring the sky and the trees and so on. I feel a sense of belonging to a bigger consciousness. So I started to think about it, what was the problem and why wasn't I understanding it? And I think it's because there are two very different viewpoints. There's a viewpoint of human consciousness and mind, and there's a viewpoint called panpsychism, which is a sort of universal cosmic consciousness. And they're coming from these two different viewpoints. And then there's another problem in understanding, in that people use different definitions of the word. And so I was looking up definitions, and when I looking up definitions, I found the Oxford Dictionary definition, which says aware of and responsive to environment. And as a lifetime biologist, interested, in everything, bacteria and amoebae and worms and trees and animals and so on, and rocks, I realized everything's aware of and responsive to environment. Now, the word aware may seem to be a particularly human sort of word, but we could replace that word with sensing environment or detecting changes in environment or sensing or detecting changes and responding appropriately. And I thought, well, everything is. If that's the definition of consciousness, consciousness is everywhere. So I thought, well, I'll start with the atom and try to work out what consciousness is and go from the atom to the molecule, to the cell, to the tissue, the organ, to populations, ecosystems, planets, galaxies, and so on. And I thought the second thing that was inspiring me to do this was that I wanted to be really materialistic and mechanistic and reductionist about it, because I was getting upset about there's sort of an anti-materialistic sense, anti-science going on. And although that I often talk about the fact that I see myself as three-dimensional, we're all three-dimensional, we're all scientists, objective truth, we're all poets, subjective truth, the intuition, imagination, hunch, gut feeling that we've talked about this morning, and we're all mystics, dissolving and merging with the whole, and these are complementary opposite ways of knowing and being. So, and it's not that I'm only a scientist, I do see myself as a poet and a mystic as well. But because of this use of the word materialistic, mechanistic, reductionist as being sort of a bit of an anti-science, I thought I'm going to be totally mechanistic. I'm going to be very reductionist in my approach to consciousness. And nobody was more surprised than myself when I ended up at the end of my analysis with proof of the concept that God is love. In the main Abrahamic religions, God is love, and love works. I mean, just every day love works. And neglect, abandonment, and abuse doesn't. So I started off anyway looking at awareness and responsiveness to environment. And I created an interconnected structure. It's a binary structure. If you could imagine an ancestry model where this is me, and those are my parents, and their parents, and their parents, and their parents, turn that upside down and put cosmos at the top and atoms at the bottom. Can you imagine that binary structure? So at the bottom we have atoms, okay? Now atoms, we know, consist of neutrons, protons, electrons in service. Those parts are in service to the atom. If they don't serve, if you mess up the ratio of neutrons to protons or shoot an electron out, the atom decays. Then the atoms coalesce, make a conglomerate, they make the molecule. We know how, so at every level we know how things work. We know how the atoms bond, the covalent bonding, sharing some electrons in outer orbits. We know how they bond to make the molecule. The molecules conglomerate, right, and make the cell. So we have about 3,000 biochemical pathways, all interconnected. And the cells are told what to do according to where they are in the developing fetus, and they become blood, muscle, gut, nerve, skin, da-da-da-da. They signal their environment, and they program their genes to serve appropriately in the organ that the tissue becomes part of. Then the organs are serving the life forms, and I deliberately left humans out of my model, put a mouse in a tree instead, because I think the confusion between panpsychism, universal pervasive consciousness, and individual human brain consciousness is, I want that confusion right out of the way. And then the individual life forms make populations. You could think of a beehive or a man-of-war jellyfish, and here all the individuals do different jobs to make a higher structure that's capable of more things. In a way, we do that in a role that we fulfill in society. You do that bit, they do that, and society is supposed to work. And then I go from populations, and here there is an illogical point in my hierarchy of interconnectedness in that I put the populations into ecosystems. Up until now, it's been a conglomeration of parts to have greater stability, survival, as being part of something bigger, part of something bigger, part of something bigger. But when I get to populations, I think, well, what's a conglomerate of populations? But I need to put them in an ecosystem. So I know that's an illogical point in my interconnected model. So put them into ecosystems. We know that we've got the forest and the river and the predators and the prey and the foliage and the trees and everything in harmony in the ecosystem, serving the greater whole. At every level, the parts are serving the greater whole, but they don't know what that is, the whole. At every level, the whole is serving its parts and looking after them, like the beehive's looking after the bees, but the bees, if the beehive's destroyed, the bees die. Or if the bees don't serve, the beehive dies. The bees don't really know about the beehive. They're sort of programmed, their genes are programmed differently to do different jobs. So what I'm saying, at every level of increasing complexity, the material mechanisms of service of parts to a higher order structure are known. So there's nothing, it's all known scientifically. So I thought, well, this is great. But so put the populations to ecosystems. If you take out a river, take out a forest, the ecosystem dies. And ecosystems conglomerate to make a planet, and the planets conglomerate to make a solar system. Solar systems gather together to make galaxies, galaxies to make cosmos. So it's a model of, it's sort of like the awareness of your surroundings and the service become a sort of, the awareness is the interconnectedness. And that's who we are. We are a collection of experiences of interconnected events all linked together, so that when you have a memory of that experience, you remember what you saw, what you heard, what you smelled, what you felt, your emotions, etc. That's all saved, and you can recall it. So the parts are in service to the whole all the way up. And I think I might have I gotten you my 10 minutes?
Yeah.
So with the interconnectedness, okay, you know that it can change, everything knows what everything else is doing, right? My position in the interconnected hierarchy, that's where I have my consciousness. But because I'm interconnected with everything else, I have the consciousness of everything else as well, if you understand what I mean. Because interconnectedness can flux, can move, as been shown in many systems, you can have flux down and flux up, and from middle out. So you could have a solar flare, which disperses the populations that have got to live in a different way in a new environment, which will end up reprogramming their DNA of their genes. So that flux can actually mask mechanisms, because at every level of complexity, the actual material scientific mechanisms are different. But if you're fluxing through the system, you could have something like the paranormal remote viewing without necessarily seeing how that works, because it goes through several orders of complexity, if you understand what I'm saying. So now, all this is sort of looking like survival of the fittest, certainly the conglomerates of things as you go up. birds of a feather flock together, safety in numbers, ensure greater survival. But there's a lot of upset about Darwin's expression, survival of the fittest, because it looks like the whole of evolution is a competition. But you could also say it's avoidance of extinction, because if the parts don't serve the whole properly, or if the whole's not looking after its parts, it'll go extinct. But that doesn't matter, because you've got to always hold that creation equals extinction. There's as many species gone extinct as are on the planet today, and that turnover means that the old is being replaced by the new. There's only so much stuff spat out by the Big Bang, so that for creation to continue, death has got to equal birth, and extinction's got to equal creation. So now I said I'm going to end up with a proof of the concept that God is love. The point is about service. Max is imbued with the idea of unconditional love. And as I said, although the parts don't know who they're serving, the whole is looking after the parts. So it's like when I was thinking this all the way through, looking at purely scientific material mechanisms throughout, I saw that I had these rules of service parts to whole looking after parts, conglomeration of parts to make a greater whole, turnover, etc. When I got to the top, it was impossible to draw a line, because one of the rules was the parts don't know who they're serving. So that I had the whole cosmos not knowing who it was serving. And the lesson from the scientific analysis that appropriate service ensuring flourishing and survival looking like love, it sort of looked at the top. I don't know, you might think this is a huge leap, but at the top it looked like at the end there had to be something more. There had to be a higher power beyond cosmos looking after everything.
Thank you very much.